right, here we are on another beautiful morning, and I just read this statement about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints updating a bunch of minor things in the headings of the Doctrine and Covenants, and just two in the Book of Mormon, and it's just the headings, so stuff that's trying to give summaries to better, because of the Joseph Smith Project, which Don Bradley, author of the last 116 pages, has been, I think, knee-deep in. Sorry, I'm going to scoot up here. So they are making sure, hey, we get everything right. Make it more historically accurate or better worded. So that's really cool. One of the things I wanted to check is like how major of a change is it, and should I expect to have more, do I need to go out and grab new scriptures? Right? Because despite it already being changed and updated on the online versions through the church apps, it is going to be in print here shortly. But have they... And they even said, yeah, you don't really need to go out and get new scriptures in the email that they send, but I wanted to see for myself and make that judgment. And so I read through what they had, and I'm like, yeah, they're right. You really don't need to go out and get new stuff. It's for example, changed minor dates to be more specific through the research that they've done. They've changed certain wording to make sure that people understand, hey, this applies to this or that, or gives more context, acknowledges other things. And again, it's mostly adjustments to the headings in the Doctrine and Covenants. And so because of that, major changes? No. Now, on the other hand, if they had added Proclamation of the World as section 139 in the Doctrine and Covenants or something like that, or the Beware of Pride talk is section 139, something like that, I'd be like, yeah, definitely go out and get some new scriptures. But dude, if they added the proclamations at the end of the Doctrine and Covenants, dude, I would be there. I would totally be there. I really think it should be in black and white ink, and heck, even engraved on stone, practically. That proclamation of the family proclamation of the world is super, super important. I would add the proclamation on the restoration. I think that'll probably come into importance in the next 10 years or so. But anyways, that's my pure speculation going on. In the meantime, besides that really cool announcement, nothing huge, but still pretty neat, let's dive into tent people. So last time, we were really diving into dreams and how the actual region and experiences of Lehi absolutely helped determine his specific vision and dream. I know for us, because we're so removed from his experience, we see all the symbolism easily. For him, I'm sure that God had to help inform him, like Nephi, because, yeah, it was still good enough for him to know that it's time to skedaddle. All right. So we were talking about dreams, and then we were talking about the desert experience, which is all super cool. But let's continue with the tent people. The editors of the Book of Mormon have given a whole verse to Nephi's laconic statement, "And my father dwelt in a tent," 1 Nephi 2:15. And rightly so, since Nephi himself finds the fact very significant. He refers constantly to his father's tent as the center of his universe. To an Arab, "my father dwelt in a tent" says everything. The present inhabitants of Palestine, writes Canaan, like their forefathers, are of two classes, dwellers in villages and cities, and the Bedouin. As the life and habits of one class differs from those of the other, so do their houses differ. Houses in villages are built of durable material. On the other hand, Bedouin dwellings, tents, are more fitted for nomadic life. An ancient Arab poet boasts that his people are the proud and chivalrous people of the horse and camel, the dwellers in tents, and no miserable ox drivers. The Persian king, but 50 years after the fall of Jerusalem, boasts that all the civilized kings, as well as the Bedouin tent dwellers, brought their costly gifts and kissed my feet, thus making the same distinction as the later poet, one of the commonest oaths of the Arabs. Burckhardt reports, is by the life of this tent and its owners, taken with one hand by resting on the middle of the tent pole. If a man's estate is to be declared void after his death, the tent posts are torn up immediately after the man has expired, and the tent is demolished. While, on the other hand, the erection of a new tent in the desert is an important event celebrated with feast and sacrifice. And the cult of the tent was as important to the Hebrews as well. Indeed, Hebrew tent, ochel, Arabic family, achal, were originally one and the same word. The Bedouin has a strong affection for his tent, says Canaan. He will not exchange it with any stone house. So Jacob was an honest man and dwelt in tents, though, let us add, by no means in squalor. Casual travelers in the Orient who have seen only the filthy, wretched tents of the tribeless gypsy Bedouins would be surprised, perhaps, at the spaciousness and simple luxury in the tent of a great desert sheik. That quote comes from W.B. Seabrook, Adventures in Arabia. So, if you're wondering about the whole description of squalor and the gypsy Bedouins now versus the sheik, that came from someone else besides Hugh Nibley. But he, of course, reads it as an illustration of his point of how nice the tents are. And honestly, I have no idea, and I doubt Hollywood actually knows, but at least they'd have a little bit more than I would about the knowledge of what the inside of a tent looks like. Because when I see the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, and he goes to Jethro's tent, it's a nice tent. It's actually big, spacious, nice, comfortable. The other tents that I can think of, also depicted by Prince of Egypt. Again, Jethro's tent is a large and beautiful and comfortable thing. So, not squalor, but instead pleasant. So, with an announcement that his father dwelt in a tent, Nephi serves notice that he had assumed the desert way of life, as perforce he must for his journey. Any Easterner would appreciate the significance and importance of the statement, which to us seems almost trivial. If Nephi seems to think of his father's tent as the hub of everything, he is simply expressing the view of any normal Bedouin, to whom the tent of the sheik is the sheet anchor of existence. A white flag, we are told, is sometimes hoisted above his tent to guide strangers and visitors. All visitors are led directly to the tent of the sheik. When Nephi urged the frightened Zoram to join the party in the desert, he said, "If thou wilt go down into the wilderness to my father, thou shalt have place with us." 1 Nephi 4:43. Incorrectness of the proposal is attested not only by the proper role of Lehi in receiving members and guests into the tribe, but also in the highly characteristic expression, "Thou shalt have place with us." For since time immemorial, the proper words of welcome to the stranger who enters one's tent has been Ahlan wa salan wa marhaban. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban. literally, perhaps, a family, a smooth place, a wide place. Equivalent expressions are found in the Old Testament, as when Abraham invites his heavenly visitor to sit beneath his tree. See Genesis 18, verse 4. And here, too, such details are authentic touches of Bedouin life. But none of the Bible expressions are as typically Arabic as Nephi's invitation. The order of march. The Book of Mormon tells us a good deal about how Lehi and his people moved through the desert, and the report can now be checked against the first-hand accounts of life with the Arabs, which the last 100 years, and especially the last 40, have brought forth. All these would agree that with Nephi, that the key note of life in Arabia is hardship. Life is hard, a ceaseless struggle for existence against nature and man. It is no exaggeration, writes a present-day authority, to say that Bedouin is in an almost permanent state of starvation. Many times between their waterings, Dougherty reports, there is not a single pint of water left in the greatest sheik's tent. Palgrave's recollection is particularly impressive. Then an insufficient halt for rest or sleep, at most 2 or 3 hours, soon interrupted by the oft-repeated admonition, "If we linger here, we all die of thirst," sounding in our ears, and then to remount our jaded beasts and push them on through the dark of the night, with the constant probability of attack or plunder from roving marauders. At or about an hour before sunset, we would stagger off our camels as best we might to prepare an evening feast of precisely the same description as that of the forenoon, or more often, lest the smoke of our fire should give notice of some distant rover, to content ourselves with dry dates and half an hour's rest on the sand. That is W.M.C. Palgrave's Narrative of the Year's Journey through the Central and Eastern Arabia. London, 1866. Phew. That is rough. I thought my camping was rough. Not even. This, it is true, is marching under pressure, but the conditions, no fire, raw meat, wading through much affliction, are exactly duplicated in the Book of Mormon. Lehi's party is described as moving through the desert for a few days, 3 or 4, in one would estimate, then camping for the space of a time. This is exactly the way the Arabians move. Caravan speeds run between 2 1/4 and 3 9/10 miles an hour, 30 miles being, according to Chessman, a good average for the day, and 60 miles being the absolute maximum. The usual estimate for a good day's march is reckoned by Arab writers at between 28 and 30 miles. In special or favorable circumstances, it may nearly be 40. On the other hand, a day's slow journey for an ass nomad moving much slower than camel riders is 20 miles. The number of days spent at any one place varies, as in the Book of Mormon, with circumstance. From 10 to 12 days is the average time a Bedouin encampment of ordinary size will remain on the same ground, according to Jennings Bramley, who, however, observes, "I have known them stay in one spot for as long as 5 or 6 months. The usual thing is to camp as long as possible in one place, until it is soiled by the beasts, and the multiplication of fleas becomes intolerable, and the surroundings afford no more pasturage. Then the tents are pulled down, and the men decamp. On the Syrian and Arabic plain, according to Buckhart, the Bedouins encamp in summer near wells. There they remain often for a whole month. Lehi's time schedule thus seems to be a fairly normal one, and the 8 years he took to cross Arabia argue neither very fast nor very slow progress. The Beni Hillel took 27 years to go a not much greater distance. After reaching the seashore, Lehi's people simply encamped there for the space of many days, until a revelation again put them in motion. 5. The problem of baggage. Were Lehi's party ass nomads or camel nomads? The latter. There can be no doubt. The times required it, and the Book of Mormon all but insists on it. But before turning to the evidence, it would be well to correct the theory, sometimes propounded that the party went on foot. When the Lord appoints a man to a task, he gives him his means of carrying it out, as Nephi himself observes, and to Lehi he had given ample means indeed. The sight of a rich merchant and his family setting out for the desert in a caravan, even some magnificence, would never have existed. A caravan, even of some magnificence, would never have excited the slightest comment from Lehi's neighbors. Whew. Burckhardt describes this as a matter of course passing by the caravan of a rich merchant from Maskat in the deep desert. He had 10 camels to carry his women, his infant children, his servants, and his baggage. Lehi would have been such a one. For an elderly and aristocratic Hebrew to load himself, his wife, and his children with tents, utensils, weapons, food, and other supplies would have been as unthinkable then as now, without the camel. Writes a modern authority, it would be impossible for the nomads to carry their tents and furniture over the vast sandy spaces where asses can pass only with difficulty and carry only a very small load. The decisive clue is the fact that Lehi's party took grain with them, and all manner of seeds of every kind. See 1 Nephi 8:1. The Arabs, as we shall see below, do this when they migrate in earnest, packing the seed in big, black, 150 to 180 pound sacks, 2 to a camel. At the very least, there has to be enough grain either to make a worthwhile crop somewhere or to supply substantial food on the way. And who could carry such a load on his back? To pass through the heart of Arabia on the best camel in the world requires almost superhuman endurance. No need to make the thing ridiculous by carrying children, tents, books, food, furniture, weapons, and grain on one's back. So, this means that so far, he is making the argument that not only is he definitely taking to the nomadic tent life, and that the tent life is not bad, especially that it's going to be more like a sheik, because Lehi, as I stated, was some sort of wealthy aristocrat or merchant, and that they would definitely have had camels. Raswan tells us that the camel breeders do not fear the waterless stretches of the desert as the sheep and goat-raising Arabs do, and for that reason camel owners remain independent and free. On the other hand, they are often in danger of starving, and when we read that Lehi's people were continually in such danger and supported themselves by hunting alone, so that a broken bow could mean death by starvation, we may be sure that they were camel nomads without flocks, as indeed their hasty flight from Palestine requires. Among the listing of the stuff that they took with them, flocks are never mentioned, as of course they had such. What? Among the listing of the stuff that they took with them, flocks are never mentioned, as of course they would be had. As of course they would be had. They had such. I wonder if it meant that would be had. They had such. The flocks and herds of all kinds of the Jaredites are always given first place in the description of their migration. And we may confidently assume that the silence of Nephi on this head indicates that his people did not travel as herdsmen. But neither does Nephi mention camels. Why not? For the very reason that they receive no notice in many an Arabic poem which describes travel in the desert, simply because they're taken for granted. In the East, the common words, for example, of taking things for granted. Notice how many of our recipes call for eggs. They don't say what kind of eggs. Is it an ostrich egg? An alligator egg? Is it a quail egg? But everyone just says egg in their recipe. Why? Because everybody knows it's the regular chicken egg. And so, when we take things for granted, We take it so entirely for granted, we don't even notice it until someone points it out. And it's the same thing with older recipes, too. I think the reason I learned that trick was, I think that came from the discussion of how to make Roman cement, the type that gets stronger over time. For them, they just said add water. But to them, it was like our egg. For them, it was seawater, salt water. That seawater, that salt water, made the cement stronger. And so that's the reason it eluded us for so long, because we think of fresh water now, but for them it was seawater. Why waste fresh water on construction? Why waste any implication of camels when everyone knows it's camels? Except, we live in prosperous areas that have cars now, so camels are not exactly common. In the East, the common words for travel are camel words. Thus, rahal and safar, the two basic words, both mean to set out on a journey and also to saddle a camel. The presence of camels being inferred with no special mention of them is made. When I say I drove from Heber to Salt Lake, no one would think to ask, in a car? Though for all my hearers know I may have driven a chariot or tricycle. In the same way, when the Arab reports that he has journeyed in the desert, he never adds on a camel. For in his language, to travel means to go by camel. Had Lehi's party gone afoot, that would indeed have been a 9 days' wonder, and something would have referred to it on every page, for such a thing was never seen nor heard of before or since his day. But when the camel is the only means of travel, it is an unnecessary to mention camels in describing a journey, as it would be to specify that one sails on the sea in a ship. There is one episode, however, in which camels play a definite role in the Book of Mormon. From their base camp in the valley of Lemuel, Lehi's sons made a flying trip back to Jerusalem. It was the young men alone who made the journey, which turned out, as they expected, 1 Nephi 3:5, to be a dangerous one. Now, it is the established procedure among the Arabs for a few young men in a tribe to seek gain and glory by making quick raids on neighboring towns and tribes. On such expeditions, they never take tents, for their transportation is limited and speed is of the essence. Nephi wants us to know that this trip to Jerusalem was no such raid, for they were going on legitimate business and took their tents with them. So that's why they mention it. They went boldly and openly into Laban's and stated their business. Only when he treated them as robbers were they forced to act as such, slinking about like true Bedouins outside the gates and entering the city only by night. A typical Oriental episode of this story is the wild pursuit out of the city and into the desert. How many a filibuster by Bedouin braves in the town has ended that way? You chase me and I chase you is the essence of desert tactics, according to Philby. One of this exciting chase, Nephi reports in chapter 3, verse 27, we did flee into the wilderness, and the servants of Laban did not overtake us, and we hid ourselves in the cavity of a rock. Note that they were pursued right into the wilderness, for upon reaching the desert they were not safe but had to hide under a rock. The young men might have fled a short distance through the town on foot, but fleeing into the wilderness was another matter. There they would have been quickly run down by mounted riders unless they first escaped notice. But Nephi tells us that they hid only after they had outrun their pursuers, who failed to overtake them. The powerful and affluent military governor certainly had a fleet of steeds that could run down a camel, but in the sudden getaway of the brothers, there would be no time to saddle them. An ancient Arab poet and king, Imrul Qais, speaks of a phenomenal horse that passed the night with saddle and bridle on him without being sent to the stable. But other horses, including Laban's, would need more attention and lose more time getting under way, and we can confidently assume that both pursuers and pursued rode the usual camels. As for the chance that Nephi and his brethren were mounted on horse, it is a remote one, for the horse cannot carry burdens in the desert, and even horse-raising Arabs seldom ride their animals on long journeys, but whenever possible lead them tethered to their camels without riders or loads. Raswan gives many illustrations of this. The use of camels is implied at every turn of the story of the mission to Laban. The otherwise insane carrying of tents, the trip down country to bring back exceeding great property to Laban's place, hardly on their shoulders, the flight into the open country in pursuit in the desert, and finally the long and necessarily hasty return trip, for they were marked men, and possibly the direction of their takeoff had been noted, to the secret base camp, just as the saints who had the means of avoiding it never crossed the plains on foot. So we would think Lehi's sons foolish indeed if they did not avail themselves of the common means of transportation that everyone was using, for camels were as common then as automobiles are today. The problem of food. This is really kind of cool. You kind of get the deserty kind of feel and vibe among different pictures from the church or older movies and such, but never to this extent. Not many years ago, Professor Frankfurt wrote of the South Desert, "The secret of moving through this desolation at all times been kept by the Bedouin." Let me reread that. The secret of moving through this desolation has at all times been kept by the Bedouin. Intrepid explorers of our own day have learned the secret, however, and Lehi knew of it too. Like a sudden flash of illumination comes the statement that Lehi, by divine instruction, led us in the more fertile parts of the wilderness. Woolley and Lawrence describe such more fertile parts as stretching over the flat floor of the plain in long lines like hedges. They are the depressions of dried-up watercourses, sometimes hundreds of miles long. They furnish, according to Bertram Thomas, the arteries of life in the steppe, the path of Bedouin movement, the habit of animals by reason of the vegetation, scant though it is, which flourishes in the beds alone. In Arabia, it is practice of following the more fertile parts of the wilderness that alone makes it possible for both men and animals to survive. Chessman designates as touring the practice followed by men and beasts of moving from place to place in the desert as spots of fertility shift with the seasons. Ooh, you want a good example of that, shifting fertility of the seasons. Like, again, this is a concept that's probably foreign to most of us because we sit here and live in prosperous cities where we can sit our duff down, work at a computer all day, and go to a store. But there were nature videos that showed how on the Sahara, the plains in Africa, that as the weather would change with the seasons, meaning that these are big giant grasslands basically, that it would migrate up with the rains to make the grass greener, and then it would migrate down with the rains and make the grass greener further south. So you see this kind of undulating wave where you have yellow and green and then yellow and green, and it switches because the rain comes up here, makes it, everyone migrates up there, then it comes down and it makes everything greener down here, so everything migrates down here. So it's just this undulating greenery that the animals follow. And so if you think of the Arabian Peninsula in its own way, that, well, during the different seasons, it will have different places which flourish. In Arabia, it is this practice to follow the more fertile parts of the wilderness that alone makes it possible for both men and animals to survive. Oh, yes, and the fertility shifts with the seasons. Okay. The Arab forager is everlastingly prowling, scouting, tracking, and spying. In fact, some believe that the original root of the names Arab and Hebrew is a combination of sounds meaning to lie in ambush. Every Bedouin is a sportsman, both from taste and necessity, writes one observer, who explains how in large families some of the young men are detailed to spend all their time hunting. Nephi and his brethren took over the business of full-time hunters, and in that office betrayed the desert tradition of the family. For Nephi had brought a fine steel bow from home with him, though we shall consider the steel again in dealing with the sword of Laban. It should be noted here that a steel bow was not necessarily a solid piece of metal any more than the Canaanites' chariots of iron. See Joshua 17, 16 through 18, or Jude, or Judges 1:19, 4 and 3, were solid iron. Yeah, chariots of iron. Or that other various implements mentioned in the Old Testament as being of iron, e.g. carpenter's tools, pens, threshing instruments, were iron and only iron. It was in all probability a steel-ribbed bow, since it broke at about the same time that the wooden bows of his brothers lost their springs. Only composite bows were used in Palestine. That is, bows of more than one piece, and steel-backed bow would be called a steel bow, just as an iron-trimmed chariot was called a chariot of iron. Incidentally, the founder of Seljuk dynasty of Iran was called Yakak, which means, says our Arabic informant, a bow made out of iron. The fact that iron arrow was a fairly common name among those people and refers actually to an iron-headed arrow is a strong indication of the same steel bow may refer to a real weapon. That's true. I mean, there's so many times as a kid I was thinking of it as kind of mostly an all-metal bow, but yeah, you don't really see that until modern manufacturing processes. And even then, most bows are still composite to this day, composited of different materials. Hunting in the mountains of Arabia to this day is carried out on foot and without hawks or dogs. In classical times, the hunter in this area was equipped with a bow and a sling, exactly like Nephi. Nephi's discovery that the best hunting was only at the top of the mountain agrees with later experience, for the oryx is a shy animal that travels far and fast over steppe and desert in search of food, but retires ever to the almost inaccessible sand mountains for safety. In western Arabia, the mountains are not sand, but rock. And Burckhardt reports that in these mountains between Medina and the sea, all the way northward, this is bound to include Lehi's area, mountain goats are met, and the leopards are not uncommon. Julius, leopards in the desert. Well, I guess in the mountains of the desert. I never thought of that, but I mean, if I think snow leopards in the steppes of Tibet, why wouldn't there be a desert cat? The desert leopard. We have mountain lions here in North America. Pumas, if you have the black ones that are more common from down south. Yeah, I just never thought of there being leopards in the desert, but at the same time I'm like, what would you think of snow leopards in the steppes of Asia? Huh. Cool. They used to have lions all over Europe until they killed them off. Yeah, we're good at killing things that kill us. Take example, the wolves of North America. All right. Well, and there's plenty of mountain lions here in Utah, too. Anyway. All right. Julius Euting has left us... Julius Euting has left us vivid descriptions of the danger, excitement, and exhaustion that go with the hunting of big game that abounds in these mountains, which are, by the way, very steep and rugged. Yeah, they would be. Things looked black when Nephi broke his fine steel bow, for the wooden bows of his brothers had lost their springs. Chapter 16, verse 21. Note the peculiarity Semitic use of the plural for a noun of quality. Lost their springs. wow, this guy picks up on stuff like a microscope on a dish. Anyways, and through those skilled in the art of hunting, they knew little enough about bow making, which is a skill reserved to specialists even among primitives. Incidentally, archery experts say that a good bow will keep its spring for about 100,000 shots, from which one might calculate that the party at the time of the crisis had been traveling anything from 1 to 3 years. It was, of course, out of the question to make the familiar composite bow, and was something of a marvel when Nephi did make out of wood a bow. For the hunter, the most conservative of men would never dream of changing from a composite to a simple bow. Though it sounds simple enough when we read about it, it was almost as great a feat for Nephi to make a bow as it was for him to build a ship, and he is justly proud of his achievement. According to the ancient Arab writers, the only bow wood obtainable in all of Arabia was the nab wood that grew only amid the inaccessible and overhanging crags of Mount Jashem and Mount Azd, which are situated in the very region where, if we follow the Book of Mormon, the broken bow incident occurred. Dude. How many factors must be correctly conceived and correlated to make the apparently simple story of Nephi's bow ring true? The high mountain near the Red Sea, at a considerable journey down the coast, the game on the peaks, hunting with a bow and sling, and finding a bow of wood viewed as something of a miracle by the party. What are the chances of reproducing such a situation by mere guesswork? As for the grain which Lehi carried, it was not to be eaten on the journey, for it was seed of every kind, and needless concern for variety unless it was meant to be sown. While ordinary travelers scarcely ever carry grain for food in the desert, it is a common thing for migrating Bedouins to carry seed with them, in the thought, sometimes very vague indeed, the possibility of the year is a good one. They might find a chance to sow a hasty crop. In Sinai, the Bedouin yearly sow beds of the wadis, but they do this with little hope of reaping the harvest, more than once in every 3 or 4 years. Lehi, looking for a promised land, would under no circumstances have set out without such provision for securing crops in his new home. In traveling, the wheat is put in the black homemade goat's hair sack, the fardate. The fardate, or the Hebrew sack, S-A-Q, Genesis 42:25, holds about 150 to 180 pounds of wheat. Two are put on a camel. The mention of the custom in Genesis shows that it was ancient usage even in the time of Lehi. Next chapter is Desert Ways and Places. Wow, we got through that pretty darn quick. We're starting to cruise through this. I'm finding this very fascinating. All right. All right, so I love scholarly things when they point out specificity that it's like, guys, don't you get it? And frankly, okay, I've noticed that I have these things where it's like, I take notice of something, but then I just like leave it at the back of my head until something comes up later and it just, here's the answer to that question that you never actually asked, but you took note of. And this was one of them. Because, remember, I've done a lot of camping in the desert and such because of Boy Scouts and just my family and such. And we're in a high desert whenever you go down to places like Arches and Moab and things like that because it's on the Colorado Plateau. And when you go out there, every kid wants to have their own bow and arrow or staff or, hiking stick, whatever you kind of want, sword. The only trees we always had around us were those not Joshua trees. That's more in the Southwest, like in California and Nevada. But it's not scrub. There would be scrub brush. There's definitely a bunch of sage. Um, Come on, what's the name of it? Juniper trees. Juniper trees are these squat, gnarled little trees that, they'll have this bark that peels off. Uh, they're kind of okay for fires if needed, but only if they've like truly been dead. And then they're terrible because of how the wood twists. It's hard to peel off branches, even if it is dead. So you hopefully just get all the little tiny twigs and branches that are the very ends of a dead juniper tree to help with your. But juniper trees are so hardy, it was really hard to find any that were dead or had anything dead on them. And so, golly, these juniper trees are just nasty pieces of work. There's not a straight line of wood among all of them. And I would, now obviously, the half a world away deserts are going to be very different than deserts in the Great Basin. But there is going to be a lot that's fairly similar. And them pointing out that the only area that you could have wood for a bow is in this particular area, I believe it. I had never thought of that. I'd never truly articulated and spoke that question. But I'd often wondered, how did Nephi make his bow in the wilderness? Because to me, I'm like, desert wood is stout, squatty, gnarled pieces of, juniper boughs, or maybe there's scrub brush here and there. But that's my experience in the desert. Their experience in the desert, they have things like dates and palm trees. Now, palm trees I know are terrible for really building anything because they're more akin to grass than they are like what we would think of as a regular tree. The reason I found that out was being in San Diego, because every once in a while you'd come across someone who had cut down their palm tree because maybe it just got too tall or it broke or storm took it down or something. And when you look at the stump of a palm tree, it's extremely porous. That it's just this, here you have flat ground and boom, it's almost like a cartoon where it's just a little ridge and then flat. But you can see that it's full of tiny, tiny little holes and very porous in that way, and it just slowly degrades over time. And so I just cannot fathom any kind of palm type tree, because out in the middle of Brawley, there were little oases and such near Calipatria Island where you had like actual palm trees. And dude, I would never stand under a wild palm tree. Like the curated ones where they have this nice, long, elegant kind of trunk of a tree with a poof at the top. Those are curated. Those are ones where they've trimmed all the branches, because normally palm trees they come up, the leaves grow green, and then they fold over and die. And so you have the pump of green on top, which is the new palms. But then you have this whole rank and file dead leaves that are all just kind of making a teardrop out of it. And they just mat down further and further. And dude, when I saw those type of palm trees that are not cared for, I totally understood the reason why you don't want to go near them, because I'm sitting there going like, how many bugs are under there? How many spiders tarantulas and other things could fall from those things? Ooh. Yeah. So when I sit here and think of the deserts that they were probably going through, they probably had a bunch more of stuff that was closer to the deserts in California more than the deserts in Utah. But still, palm trees are not things that would make good bows. Most desert plants that I could think of would just not make good bows. So I had always imagined kind of a survivalist bow that he took like bundles of sticks to put them together. If you've ever seen the newer Tomb Raiders, the ones where they redid it more recently, so not the old ones, but the new one, where she's kind of more survivalist, and she has the climbing pickaxe, and she has a bow, and she makes it from like one or two, one big center stick, but then as it comes closer to the center, she bundles more sticks around it, and then she wraps twine around it. So that way it's more strengthened in the center, instead of just having a little like bow. And so I was thinking it could have been something more like that, because again, my view of the desert is that there's very little good wood to do anything. On the other hand, if he's in the exact right spot God needs him to be to have that nearly unreachable, perfect type of wood for making a bow, why not? God is really good at weaving together the things that are necessary to have miracles time after time after time, so that we can rely on him, leading us just in the right ways and in just the right places. That's really cool. Well, I've enjoyed this. It's really making it clear how things really were for them. And I hope it deepens your testimony. I know, just like when Jonah Barnes sits there and says, the proof is in the pudding, and look at how many things are just absolutely scream that, both Moses and Abraham in the Pearl of Great Price are absolutely 100% awesome and cool and true. This is also screaming, this is so true. And then we haven't even gotten to Nahum yet. So we'll see. Let me reread the chapter headings. We've got, next will be into the desert. We just read into the desert. Desert ways and places, the city of sand, Lehi the winner, a twilight world, departure. Interesting. Oh, that's the world of Jaredites. Cool. Anyway, I'm excited. And I hope this helps strengthen at least the understanding of the culture and stuff that Lehi went through. And filling in the details that support, hey, this is obviously real. Well, may God be with you.